Okay, welcome everyone to the deep dive.
Great to be diving in.
Our mission, as always, is pretty straightforward. We take a specific source, unpack the really crucial insights, and, well, hand them over to you.
Think of it as getting the key takeaways without having to sift through everything yourself.
Exactly. And today, our source is excerpts from a text called O Hivio.
Which translates to something like the Hippocratic Oath through all times. It really explores the history and the principles around this famous oath.
Right, so we're talking about something that's been, truly foundational in medicine for millennia.
Thousands of years, yeah.
And you might be thinking, okay, how can something that ancient possibly still matter today?
It's a fair question with all our modern technology and knowledge.
Well, that's precisely what we're going to dig into, using this source as our guide. Let's get started.
Okay, so first things first. Who was this Hippocrates guy? The source gives us the basics. Born around 460 BC on Kos, a Greek island, lived a long life till about 370 BC.
And his background is pretty interesting, too. Part of the Asclepiads family.
Yeah, they were believed to be actual descendants of Asclepius, the Greek god of healing.
Wow. Talk about having medicine in your bloodline. No pressure there.
Right. But the really revolutionary thing he's credited with, and the source highlights this strongly, is separating medicine from, well, religion and superstition.
Okay. So moving away from the idea that getting sick was like punishment from the gods.
Exactly. He argued that illness wasn't divine. It was a natural process, something you could actually observe and study.
That feels like a massive conceptual leap.
It was huge. The source emphasizes his focus shifted to careful observation of the patient, tracking symptoms, understanding the dynamics of the illness.
Which is, the absolute foundation of clinical practice even now, isn't it?
Totally. Now, most people hear Hippocrates and they just think oath.
Right, the Hippocratic Oath, it's famous.
It is, but what's fascinating, and something this source really clarifies, is that the oath is only one small piece of a much, much bigger picture.
Okay, so what's the bigger picture?
It's called the Hippocratic Corpus. The source describes it as this collection of, over 60 different medical writings or treatises, all in ancient Greek.
60. So it's not just the one famous document.
Not even close. The source lists examples things like on airs, waters, and places, which sounds surprisingly modern looking at environmental health.
Yeah, like public health origins.
Kind of, and epidemics, tracking disease patterns, detailed works like on fractures, on head wounds, stuff on women's health, on women's diseases, on pregnancy.
A really broad scope.
On the nature of the child.
Yeah.
And yeah, somewhere in that collection you find the oath. Plus other texts about how doctors should behave, like on the physician or on seemly conduct.
That's an incredible body of work for that era. But the source throws a bit of a curveball here regarding who actually wrote all this, right?
It does. It tackles this common assumption that Hippocrates himself penned every single word.
Which isn't the case.
Well, the source points to this historical debate. It mentions research, like from a scholar named Franz Zacharias Ermerins back in the 19th century.
And what did he find?
After studying it all closely, he concluded the corpus wasn't one author's work. It was more like maybe 19 different authors.
19?
Yeah, from different medical schools, like the ones on Kos and another place called Cnidus, and written over a pretty long period, several centuries, maybe from the 5th down to the 3rd century BC.
Okay, so it was more like a library representing a whole school of thought, or maybe multiple schools.
That's a good way to put it.
So why do we still call it the Hippocratic Corpus then? Is it just, branding?
Maybe a bit of ancient branding. But the source suggests it's more profound than that. It's really out of respect for Hippocrates' massive influence and the overall direction he set.
So even with different authors, they shared a common approach.
Yes, that's the key idea presented. They shared that focus on rational observation, on explaining things naturally, pushing back against magic and mysticism. They're grouped under his name because they represent this new wave of medical thinking that he's seen as the figurehead for.
Got it. It's about the movement he started, not necessarily every single word. So what are some of those core ideas, those enduring principles the source pulls out, things that still resonate?
Well, one big one is the idea of preventative medicine.
Oh, interesting. Like, don't wait until things go wrong.
Exactly. The source mentions the sentiment, it is easier to prevent illness than to treat it.
That sounds incredibly modern.
Yeah.
It's all about wellness programs, screening, early diagnosis today.
Right. The source frames health as this valuable asset you need to actively look after, not just something you deal with when it's broken.
Makes sense. What else?
And then, of course, the big one, do no harm.
The absolute classic. Everyone knows that one, or thinks they do.
Right. And the source gives us the Latin phrases you sometimes hear, noli nocere si non pote juvare.
Which means?
Do not harm if you cannot help. And the more famous short version, primum non nocere.
First, do no harm.
Exactly. And this wasn't just an abstract idea. The source points out it had practical implications. Like, if a physician was unsure, the principle was basically, get help.
Don't just guess or bluff your way through it.
No. Advise the patient where they could get another opinion. The source mentions a related idea. If you don't know, advise where to seek another opinion. It's about humility.
That's quite profound. It counters that image of the all-knowing doctor.
It does, and the source even brings in a quote from Paracelsus, much later, 16th century, but reinforcing the same point.
What did he say?
Something like, be silent if you cannot find the cause, and call on colleagues for help for the good of the patient. Patient good above physician ego.
Wow. And you can see the direct line from that to modern medicine, can't you?
Absolutely. The source connects this ancient idea of consultation directly to things like medical consiliums today, where specialists gather to figure out a tricky case.
Or even teleconsultations now, using tech.
Exactly. It's the same principle, just evolved. It's all part of putting the patient first, seeking objectivity, avoiding bias. You could even say it's an early precursor to the spirit of evidence-based medicine.
Patient benefit, humility, collaboration. These threads run right through. Okay, so that brings us to the oath itself. The hukos in Greek.
Yes, the oath. The source calls it probably the most famous ancient medical text, the bedrock of medical deontology. That's the study of ethical duties for medical professionals.
And it acknowledges that it hasn't stayed exactly the same, right? People have adapted it.
Definitely. Different versions exist, tweaked over the centuries for different contexts, different beliefs, but the source stresses that the core ethical essence really remains powerful.
Can you share how the original starts?
Yeah.
The source provides a translation.
Yeah, it's quite evocative. It begins, I swear by Apollo physician and Asclepius and Hygeia and Panacea and all the gods and goddesses, making them my witnesses.
Whoa, invoking the whole pantheon of healing. Apollo, Asclepius, Hygeia for health, Panacea for remedies.
It grounds the promise firmly in the worldview of that time that I will fulfill, according to my ability and judgment, this oath and this covenant.
So right away, it links ability and judgment. Not just skill, but wisdom too.
Precisely. Now, the source also points out some parts that we don't follow literally today.
Like what?
Things like swearing to honor your teachers as if they were your parents, or promising to teach the art of medicine for free to their children and your own.
Right. The economic and social structure is totally different now.
Completely. But the source suggests the spirit behind that, the idea of lineage, respecting mentors, passing on knowledge. That spirit is still very much alive in medical training and mentorship.
Okay, so setting aside the parts tied to that specific ancient context, what are the core ethical promises that the source highlights as really enduring? The stuff that still forms the backbone.
All right, the source lays out several key ones, paraphrased a bit. First, always directing treatment for the benefit of the patient, using your best ability and judgment. Patient welfare is paramount.
Benefit of the patient, number one.
Second, actively refraining from causing any harm or injustice. That's the primum non nocere, again, very clearly stated.
Do no harm. Got it.
Third, a commitment to living your life and practicing medicine purely and holily, basically maintaining high standards of personal and professional integrity.
Right, being trustworthy.
Fourth, and this one surprised me a bit when reading the source, the oath, actually has the physician promise not to perform surgery for bladder stones.
Really? Why not?
It says to leave that to those skilled in this work, the practitioners who specialize in it.
Wow, so that's like super early evidence of recognizing medical specialization.
Isn't it? Already acknowledging that some people are better equipped for certain procedures.
Fascinating. What else?
Fifth, a promise about house calls, essentially. When entering a patient's home, do so only for their benefit and stay clear of any intentional wrongdoing, injustice, or mischief. Basically, respecting the patient's space and trust.
Respecting boundaries. Makes sense.
And finally, the big one for modern times, confidentiality.
Ah, yes. Doctor-patient confidentiality.
Oh. The oath is explicit. Keeping secret anything seen or heard in the course of treatment, or even just in the patient's life. That shouldn't be spread around. The vow is clear. I will keep secret.
That principle is absolutely fundamental today, maybe even more complex with digital records and everything.
For sure. And the source notes that the oath concludes with a powerful statement, basically asking for blessings and good standing if the oath is kept, and the opposite if it's broken.
Adds some serious weight to the promises.
Definitely ups the stakes.
Yeah.
And weaving through all these principles, the source reminds us of that final, timeless Latin maxim, non est sensus super salutis corporis.
Which means?
There is nothing more valuable than health.
Simple, powerful, and true across the ages.
Absolutely.
So, pulling it all together, what's the main takeaway from this deep dive guided by our source text? What should you, listening, really hold on to?
Well, I think we've seen that Hippocrates wasn't just, one guy who wrote an oath.
Yeah.
He represents this huge shift towards rational, observational medicine.
Right, separating it from the supernatural.
And we learned the corpus, the collection of writings, is actually this complex tapestry woven by many hands over centuries. It's a monument to a whole movement.
Yeah, not just a single person's output.
And crucially, those core ethical promises embedded in the oath itself, focusing on patient benefit, doing no harm, keeping secrets, seeking help when needed, even recognizing specialization.
They're not just historical curiosities.
Not at all. They are still fundamentally the ethical bedrock of medicine today. Understanding this long history gives so much context to the patient-physician relationship and the standards we expect.
It really does. So as you reflect on all this, maybe here's something to chew on, a question the source doesn't answer but makes you think about.
Go on.
How do these ancient promises, made in a world without, ICUs, genetic testing, or electronic health records, how do they truly translate and hold up against the really complex, sometimes ambiguous, ethical dilemmas we face in medicine today?
Like defining benefit at the end of life, or balancing confidentiality with data sharing for research.
Exactly. How does that ancient core adapt? Or where does it get tested in our modern world? Something to think about.